Well, hello and good evening to our online and live audience at GIAC. Thank you for joining us this evening for Pathways of Belonging, Navigating Immigration Policies Through the Lens of the Migrant Experience. This event is sponsored by the Tompkins County Office of Human Rights and the Academic and Reentry Services of the Cornell Prisoner Education Program. I am Ken Clark, Director of the Office of Human Rights. Richard Rivera, Associate Director of Reentry Services, is with us online amidst a busy travel schedule. Before I go further, I want to make several acknowledgments. I want to recognize that Tompkins County and Cornell University operate in the sovereign territory of the Cayuga Nation, member of the Haudenosaunee Confederation. We are grateful for the opportunity to work here and wish to extend our respect to their people and elders. Secondly, I want to also acknowledge the intellectual prowess, hard work, and creativity of 5 Cornell seniors with whom I've had the pleasure to work, enrolled in Dr. Jen Micah's class in the Dyson School of Applied Economics and Management, which focuses on racial equity in organizations. They have partnered with Richard and I in planning tonight's event. Big thank you to Lynn Medeiros, Chandra Jebod, Gina Javeri, and Jalil Siddiqui, and also to Dr. Micah for facilitating this partnership through the Dyson Grand Challenges project curriculum. Thirdly, thanks to Tom Hubble of Thomas Hubble Photography and Video for interviewing and recording several of the migrants you will see and hear from this evening. Tom will be creating a documentary of the project, of which this program is a part. It is a campus community collaboration contributing to the public discourse on racism, dispossession, and migration, and to improve the experience and positionality of immigrants in the United States. This initiative also intends to disrupt pervasive misinformation and deception regarding the reality of migrants. We will be working with our student colleagues to plan 2 more events in the new year of 2024. This project is funded by Cornell's Just Future Engagement Grant. I also want to thank Rob Henry, Media Production Assistant for Tompkins County Communications. He has done a yeoman's work just today alone to make sure the technology works for this event. And finally, a thank you to the great staff of the Greater Ithaca Activity Center, GIAC, especially Joy and others who worked with her who were so helpful and resourceful in helping us to make this event a reality here on Court Street in Ithaca. We begin tonight by hearing firsthand from the voices of migrants and their stories of navigating immigration policy. These vignettes you will see and hear were captured by Tom in a clip of a little over 7 minutes. Then we will hear from scholars and practitioners of immigration, in this order. Beth Lyon, Clinical Professor of Law and Associate Dean for Experiential Education and Clinical Program Director of the Cornell Law School. Steve Yale-Loehr, Professor of Immigration Law Practice, Cornell Law and Faculty Director, Immigration Law and Policy Programs, among other roles. Mary Jo Dudley, Director of the Cornell Farm Workers Program and Senior Extension Associate in the Department of Global Development in the Cornell College of Agriculture and Life Sciences, and Rebecca Fuentes, Community Organizer for the Workers' Center of New York and longtime immigrant activist based in Syracuse. After our panelist comments, we will take questions from in-person and online audiences, followed by a raffle in which some lucky person will receive a $50 card. We can now start with the video. Yes, stop sharing. Okay. If you can stop sharing your screen, then we can show. Okay. Okay, thanks.
Can you all see the video? Got nods.
Yes.
Thanks. No.
My name is Khurshid and I am originally from Afghanistan. So I came to US on September 1st when I came actually during the evacuation when the US armies left Afghanistan. So I came with that. When the Taliban took over in Afghanistan and the new regime came in Afghanistan, so the government in the past was collapsed and the new regime came into the power. So that's why there was no place for women in Afghanistan to be there and to be educated and to be studied. So that's why I came to the US. Wasn't any international flight in Afghanistan. There was only the US military there. And that's why that there was no choice for us. Me and some like my friends and other people believe in Wisconsin like for 4 months and we didn't have any contact with outside of the people. So we're kind of inside the military camp. They are putting the people in a specific area which they are don't have any contact with the outsider. Is to just stay in one place and you're not allowed to go from the place. After the Cornell became kind of my home, and right now I'm a junior and major in biology and society, but my main concentration is like to be a kind of epidemiologist. I don't have a student visa, that's why whenever I'm going any places, they are asking me about a visa, which I don't have any visa right now, so which also means kind of hard for me sometimes, like in here, because I don't have a proper visa and they're asking me, and also my passport and those stuff, they're also kind of expired right now, so it's kind of hard to apply for any job or anything outside of campus. It's a really big country. There's lots of places. Whenever I'm going and seeing there's so many places and lands, and I feel like if you is kind of make a policy which they can like accept more people who are like more migrants, that might be helpful, because in some of the other countries, especially countries with like Afghanistan or countries like underdevelopment, there's no job and no kind of life for some people.
My name is Isaac Okonya. I'm originally from Zimbabwe. So I came to the US in 2018 on a US Department of State scholarship, the Fulbright Imperial Free Fellowship. So it was just a one-year program where you come as an exchange visitor or a student, then you go back after 1 year. So I decided to apply for a waiver through the Department of State. Back home, when back home, there are no like depth of job opportunity there. Another issue also is the issue of I'm also an active political actor, like in the opposition politics in Zimbabwe. The issue with the regime in Zimbabwe is that they don't want to see like Zimbabwe like progressing. Like I don't know, they're so much into investing in corruption, like the smuggle minerals, the embezzle, whatever public funds. So if you talk against those things, you become an enemy. So that's the issue. So they were actually, if you come to the US here, their agents here were in the US, so they actually follow you and also sending your names to the regime in Zimbabwe. So there was some incident that happened back home with my family. So they sent some security agents at my place to try and harass my family. So I also was fearful to go back there.
My name is Nobel too. I go by Nobel and I'm from Burma, but I was in the refugee camp for so many years, and then my family decided to come to the United States. In Burma, that time we have a dictatorship, and we are Karen, which is a minority. So I was very young, but my family, my moms are talking about like have to face like suppression from this government. So that's what made them to leave the country. And then we moved to refugee. When I turned 18, we received the opportunity to apply to come to the United States to the refugee resettlement, and we applied and then we got accepted and we moved to Ithaca. And I have been living in Ithaca ever since. I have been experienced the discrimination. Sometimes I heard people say like, "Oh, refugees are here taking over our job," which is not true. That's if you can work, if you are willing to work, there's job everywhere. One professor, I failed and then I approached her. I was like, you know, I failed and I want to give another try. I need help. She told me nursing is not for everybody, and this is not a ESL school. This is a nursing school, and I was like so hurt by her work. And now I'm a registered nurse at Calico Medical Center. I'm working at telemetry floor, and it's been over 2 years now. I have my aunt family, 5 of them. My aunt, her husband, and their 3 children. They left the country because they were participating in civil disobedience movement after the military took over, and this is still going on. But it started in February 2021, and then people are protesting. They opened the fire, and people start to do civil disobedience, like they don't go to work for this government. They, you know, and a lot of them they were given like punishment. They were arrested, and then people are like fleeing the country, you know, everywhere. And my aunt also was a staff for this government, and she did not want to continue working for them. So she quit her job and she said, I'm participating in a civil disobedience movement, but for them, it's not safe to remain in Burma. And so they flee the country, go to Thailand. But then in Thailand, if you don't have proper documentation to live in their country, they can arrest you and deport you back or fine you. So these people are like stuck. If the UN or whoever have power over this policy or whoever understand how the immigration stuff working, and if they can help us, help this family get here, that would be a great blessing.
Okay, we can begin our panel discussion at this time. Beth, please lead.
Yeah, thank you so much, Mr. Clark, and everyone at Tompkins County, at CPEP, GIAC, the incredible students. It's really an honor and so exciting to see this initiative and to be able to share this time with you. So I am just going to take a few minutes to kind of set the stage, I guess, politically, for the incredible speakers that are coming next. I guess maybe as a bridge, those incredibly moving testimonies that we just heard, those are people, you hear their stories, you meet them, and you think, oh, America must be building policies to make it as easy as possible for people like that to come and feel welcome here in our country. And of course, probably all of us here tonight know that that's not the case. And so I was going to talk for a little bit about why it is that that's not the case. So I'm starting us off here with a poll from Gallup that's providing the percentage of Americans who are dissatisfied with the level of immigration because they want it decreased. And I wanted to share this with you to show so that you can see that across the board, Republicans, Independents, Democrats are showing a sharp increase in dissatisfaction. So a sharp increase in fear and a preference that immigration be decreased. So where is this coming from? Why are we seeing this? You can advance the slide. There's a recent report that for those of you who are really interested in looking at some of these trends, I really commend to you, by a group called Define American. And what Define American did was to go online and try to figure out where this fear, this anti-immigrant and anti-immigration sentiment might be coming from. And what they found is what they call the Great Replacement Network, which is the top 23 anti-immigrant videos on YouTube. They're 23 explainer videos that use animation. They've had more than 100 views collectively. And what they do is they lead viewers into other anti-immigrant media. So it's a sort of the top of the funnel, pulling people down into a really deep well of racist and xenophobic influence that's really profoundly affected American politics. And what I put on the slide for you are some still shots from some of the most popular videos, and also extracting out what are the actual points that are being made that are very successful, that are coming across and really convincing voters that there's something wrong with this country and that we're somehow under threat because of immigration. So the idea of the replacement of the white majority with a non-white population, the idea that we need protection, that immigrants are coming to assault us, may threaten Western women. These are explicit themes that you see in these videos. The idea of invasion, the use of terminology like crisis, like a surge, and the idea that if you're anti-immigrant, you're rational, you're just looking at the numbers, you just understand the economy. But if you are pro-immigration, that you're emotional, you're out of touch, you're being duped and fooled into thinking that immigration is a good thing. And also the deliberate choice of two particular sort of characters for these videos, the idea of an undocumented Latina immigrant, a Middle Eastern Muslim asylum seeker who's able to exist legally in the United States through misusing the asylum system. And the sort of top narrators that are producing a great deal of this content are organizations called Numbers USA, Federation for American Immigration Reform, and PragerU. All right, you can advance the slide. And so with this constant push, this content that in my generation, we did not see this. There was not this constant push of anti-immigrant sentiment online. We have specific consequences. Governments are almost never going to lose if they take an anti-immigration stance, if they restrict immigration, or try to push for more enforcement against immigrants. So they refuse to do sensible things like manage migration, like make sure that people who are coming to take jobs can actually do so in safety and with dignity. You see migration policies that shock the conscience. We see how not only the things that the last administration was saying, but the things they were doing, like family separation, that shock value helps to cement their political fortunes. Domestic policies that discriminate, undocumented workers who are not permitted to get the same protections under discrimination law. They don't have the same labor rights. Workers who are working in categories that have large numbers of undocumented workers, for example, farm workers don't get the same protection under employment law. You see with this type of language online, hate crimes, you see war propaganda, and you see distortions of larger political processes. So, for example, Brexit, the Trump election, you see that anti-immigration narrative can be at the root of many different larger processes. Okay, you can move forward the slide. So my last word is to try to give a little bit of hope after sharing all of this negative information. And that is that if you break down this trend and critical views of U.S. immigration by age, you see that actually the views have actually improved with younger categories in the United States. So this is a generational problem, and one that I hope will pass with older generations. And with that, I'll hand it over to Steve to sort of talk about the migration policies that have resulted from some of these politics.
Great. Thank you, Beth. I'm glad to be here tonight to share this. I'm going to talk about immigration law and policy at the national level. And why don't we advance the slide and I'll give you a little overview. It's always been hard to navigate our immigration system. We have the largest and most complex immigration system in the world, but the system is broken and it's gotten more broken over time. After I talk sort of about national trends, then I'll turn it over to Mary Jo and Rebecca to talk more about immigration policy impacts at the local and regional level. On to the next slide. So as an overview, we have the largest immigration system in the world. We have over 10 million people who come temporarily to the United States on tourist visas or student visas. We call them non-immigrants. And about 1 million people a year get what we call green cards, and we call them immigrants. The number of immigrants has declined during the COVID pandemic, but it is rebounding now. Let's go to the next slide and talk about the types of people in the United States. There are basically 4 categories. Non-immigrants are people who are here temporarily. Some non-immigrants can work, some cannot. Then many times they want to stay here, so they apply for what we call a green card. We call them technically permanent residents. That means they can be in the United States, but if they commit a crime or do something else, they can be deported from the United States. And then after they are here as a permanent resident for 3 to 5 years, they can apply to go through the naturalization process to become US citizens. And at that point, they can vote and they'll no longer be subject to possible deportation. The gray bar at the top are for people who are in sort of quasi-legal status. That includes people who are here without any status. It also includes people here in temporary status, like temporary protected status. And it also includes people under what we call the DACA program, Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals. These are young children who arrived and we don't want to deport them, so we gave them work permits. And that program is subject to litigation right now. The next slide talks a little bit more detail about non-immigrants. Some of them can work. You see all these letters and numbers here. That's immigration jargon because of where these categories appear in the immigration statute. Some people cannot work, like if you come on a tourist visa. And there are certain special cases, like if you come as a F1 student visa, you can work part-time on campus. And then after you graduate, you may be able to work for 1 or 3 years before you're supposed to go home. The next slide shows the 4 types of green cards that we have available. These are called family-sponsored, employment-based, humanitarian grounds like asylum and refugees, like the 3 people that were interviewed in the documentary. And then we also have something called the diversity green card lottery program, where 55,000 people a year can come into the United States simply because we want to have more diversity in the United States. On the next slide, you see that if you qualify for permanent resident status, you get a green card, and it gives you the right to live and work permanently in the US. The original cards were green, but are no longer green. They're sort of like your driver's license, and they're very counterfeit resistant. On the next slide, we see that 3 to 5 years after you become a green card holder, then you can apply to become a naturalized US citizen. It can take a long time to go through this process. I met somebody from India recently. It took him 22 years from the time he entered the United States initially on a student visa until he finally became a US citizen. So patience is not just a virtue, it's a requirement in immigration land, even if you do everything legally. On the next slide, we get into a little more depth about the backlogs that can occur, because we have a lot of categories, but the categories primarily are limited in number per year, and so backlogs develop. Here's a chart from the State Department about family-sponsored green cards. F1 refers to unmarried sons and daughters of US citizens. F2 refers to spouses and children of lawful permanent residents. F3 refers to married sons and daughters of US citizens. And F4 relates to brothers and sisters of US citizens. The numbers overall can be quite big, but there are many more people each year that want to come in here, and so their backlogs develop. So, for example, if you look at the bottom category, F4, for brothers and sisters of US citizens, most of them have a 16-year backlog, which is incredible. And brothers and sisters of US citizens in Mexico have a 23-year backlog. That's how backlogged our immigration system is on the family front. If we go to the employment chart on the next slide, we see that we have backlogs there too. We have 5 employment-based categories. First category is like the Albert Einsteins of the world. The second category are for people who have advanced degrees. Third people are people who either have a bachelor's degree or can show they're no US workers. Fourth employment-based category is for people who are here in special categories like religious workers. And the 5th category here is for investors. But even here we have backlogs. So for example, if I am an engineer from India who have a bachelor's degree, I'd be in the EB3 category. And you see there, the backlog there is May of 2012, which is 11 years right now. So that is a long time to wait before you get your employment-based green card. On the next slide, we see that part of the problem is that we don't have one immigration agency in the United States. If you think about environmental protection, for example, we've got one agency that does all of that, or the Veterans Administration for vets. But when it comes to immigration, we have the Department of Homeland Security, which has 3 separate immigration agencies: U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services for extending benefits, Customs and Border Protection for protecting our borders, and Immigration and Customs Enforcement, which is for doing enforcement of immigration laws in the interior. Then we have the Department of State with all of its consular posts. We have the Department of Labor, which measures whether employers can hire foreign nationals. And we have the Department of Health and Human Services, which deals with refugees and unaccompanied children. Part of the problem is because of these multitudinous agencies, they don't all talk to each other real well. And so they may have differing views on the same issue. On the next slide, we see that because of these backlogs and because we have not reformed our immigration laws since 1990, we have a very broken system. In some cases, like the H-1B temporary worker program for people who have bachelor's degree, or the H-2B category for other temporary workers who don't have bachelor's degrees, employers actually have to enter a lottery just to determine whether they can even apply to try to find foreign nationals. Last year, only about 1 out of 3 employers were actually able to get through the lottery to then file a petition on behalf of an H-1B worker. So we need to reform our laws. Part of the problem on the next slide is that we simply do not have enough US workers. We have an employer sanctions regime that says that if you hire a foreign worker without authorization, you can be fined. But on the other hand, employers are desperate for foreign workers, and sometimes they do. For example, over half of all farm workers in the US are undocumented immigrants. They are at risk of getting picked up and put into deportation proceedings, but employers really want those farm workers. On the next slide, we see another problem, and that is we don't have enough immigration judges. If you are here and are alleged to have been violating our immigration system, you're put into our immigration court. We have over 2 million cases in immigration court right now, and there are about 700 immigration judges. So if you do the math, that's about 3,000 cases per judge, many of them involving life or death consequences, like trying to apply for asylum. It's like handling a death penalty case in a traffic court setting. Sometimes those people are also detained while they're waiting for their immigration court hearings. So that's another problem in our system. On the next slide, we see that everybody recognizes our system is broken, but so far it's been impossible for Congress to fix the system. On the next slide, we see that Congress has tried. Immigration reform bills are introduced every year. The closest that Congress got was in 2013, when the US Senate passed a 1,200-page bill, but the House of Representatives failed to take up that bill. Under the given polarized Congress, it's unlikely that any comprehensive immigration reform bill will be considered until after the next presidential election. On the next slide, we see that because of Congress's inability to pass immigration reform legislatively, presidents have tried to do things with administrative powers. So, for example, President Obama used his administrative powers in 2012 to start the Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals program to protect those people who came at a young age and have not committed any crimes. Right now, nearly 600,000 people have DACA status, but they don't have any way to go from DACA status easily to get a green card. Next slide shows that we have problems at the border. You may have heard about all the numbers of people trying to cross the US-Mexico border. That's in part because of climate change and civil wars and other problems in Central and South America. Over 2 million people were apprehended at the US border last year, and many of them have been released and now are in our bigger cities and even upstate New York. On the next slide, we see that we also have increased enforcement in the interior. People who are here without legal status have to look over their shoulders all the time to worry about getting picked up by ICE, as it's called, and put into deportation proceedings and sometimes being detained. One area that we have not talked about so far is asylum on the next slide. We have an international obligation not to return people to countries where they might be persecuted. That comes from a UN Refugee Convention of 1951, which we have incorporated into US immigration law. It's always hard to get a refugee status or to win asylum in the US. You heard the stories of the people in the documentaries. All of them went through the refugee or the asylum process. Immigration judges have discretion to deny asylum, even if people can show a well-founded fear of persecution. Historically, fewer than half of all asylum applicants have won. So it's a hard way to get a status in the United States. Going back to the next slide, we see that if we do ever get legislation, it's not going to be perfect. Every legislation has compromises. As German Chancellor Otto von Bismarck once said, there are two things you should never see being made: sausage and legislation. With that, I'll stop and I'll turn it over to Mary Beth and Rebecca. And at the very end, we'll talk about what you can do personally to try to move things more in a pro-immigrant way. Over to you, Mary Beth. Mary Jo, sorry.
Thanks, Steve. So what I want to talk a little bit about is how immigration policies and practices impact the lives of immigrants. And I'm going to speak specifically from the lens of farm workers here in upstate New York. So as Steve mentioned, the current policies include an increased internal enforcement. And this is something that we see in a very lived way every day when farm workers who are working, and as Steve mentioned, over half nationwide are undocumented, can be driving with a license, with a New York State license, but policies at the federal level really play themselves out in a very real way. For example, Claudia Tenney is pushing for increased federal funding for northern border enforcement. And at the same time this policy is being promoted, we're seeing more and more people who are driving with licenses being detained by, as Steve mentioned, there's different branches of Homeland Security. One of them is what's referred to as the Border Patrol. And their job is actually in some ways, they're informally referred to as the cowboys of the immigration system. Their job is to go out and find immigrants. And just in the past year, we've seen that this increase of people who are driving. And what's interesting about these individuals is now they have a legitimate New York State license to drive a vehicle. And they are driving vehicles that they own and have titles for, but they're stopped, and literally the charges say, if you're driving a pickup truck along the northern border, and anybody who's gone to the North Country of New York State know lots of people drive pickup trucks because of the terrain. And they are charged for transporting migrants and placed into a county jail. Eventually those charges are dropped because they're without any grounds, but in the process, those individuals may be found to be out of compliance with their immigration papers, and so they are deported. What we see is that these kinds of policies have a huge impact on the families. And so undocumented adults who are very careful about ever leaving their home or going to schools, for example. In my research, I've talked with a lot of parents who say they have to make a difficult decision. Do they go to their child's parent-teacher conference when they know they're at risk of being detained en route? And at the same time, they're concerned that if they don't show up, they will be accused of being a negligent parent. So it's a catch-22. It's a no-win. But making these decisions on a daily basis is extremely stressful for families. And the other concern is for those people who may be undocumented parents of US-born children, that family separation begins at the moment where they're detained in upstate New York. Their child, a US-born child, cannot be deported, so their child will not leave. But we see how this creates a dilemma and really jeopardizes the well-being of these US-born children. I'm showing this map. This is what the ACLU refers to as the Constitution-free zone of the United States. And if you look at New York State, you can see that most of the state falls under that. However, at the same time, we see how immigrant families are learning to navigate these new environments. So this year we had over 2,300 Mexicans and Guatemalans who attended one of our 22 days of mobile consulates scattered throughout upstate New York. And these events allow them to gain access to their necessary documents, such as federally issued photo IDs. This is very important because they're required for cashing checks at banks. These IDs are required if they want to apply for a driver's license. And at these events, it's not just getting their federally issued photo ID, but we have the health clinic on site and they give free health screenings and vaccinations. And we have access to pro bono legal consultations while the consulates are in town. And there are other people who you can see the various tents who are sharing information about labor rights or educational supports. So one thing that's important to take note is that these immigrants are learning to use their voices to advocate for themselves, advocate for inclusion, and advocate for equal protections under New York State laws. For example, Rebecca will talk a little bit more about how immigrants learn to understand the political system, New York State political system, to advocate for access to all, the green light driving together, and she'll be sharing some more information about that. So it's important to say that immigrant families, individuals learn how to advocate for themselves. They're not just acted upon, but really have their own agency in communities. This was very apparent when in 2019, the New York State Legislature changed the law, the Farm Labor Fair Labor Practices Right, which amended New York State labor law to include equal protections as those that other workers have in New York State. In order to have these protections and to safeguard these protections, many undocumented farm workers spoke to legislators. They attended public hearings. They talked about the impact of having equal rights under the law. And so I think it's really important to see that these are not just people being acted upon, but these are people who actually have an agency to do what they need to do. Currently, there are farm workers who are also expressing their opposition to federal immigration proposals, the Farm Workforce Modernization Act, which they're object to the fact that these discussions are going on without any of their input. So it's critical to understand that these are families that are also planning for a better future for their US-born children, actively involved in assigning temporary guardians for their US-born children. So in the event that an undocumented parent is unable to care for their child, either in the case of a deportation or a medical situation, that they assign the person that the child knows. They make a decision about who will care for their child in their absence. And I think the other piece of it that's important to illustrate is that they are also celebrating their cultural values and traditions. And this is a photograph where a group of the Mexican farm workers were celebrating Christmas, and the kids made the piñata, they made the candy that went in the piñata. And it's important to see that their life goes on with celebration of important holidays, quinceañeras, and I think Rebecca may talk a little bit more about that. But it's also important to see how they're creating communities within communities, that they're not just being acted upon, but that they're creating a space for them to teach their children and share with others their community values and traditions. And with that, I'll turn it over to Rebecca.
Hi, thank you, Mary Jo, and thank you to your panelists. And I want to thank also the Tompkins County Human Rights Commission for the invitation, and to the students. Thank you so much for giving me this opportunity to speak about my experience as an organizer. I want to first just make a small correction. Well, it's kind of a big correction. Currently, I'm not working at the Worker Center, Central New York. I worked there for about 10 years as a community organizer. Right now, I'm an interpreter and a hiker. I love to hike. But I just want to tell you today about what happens when you don't have a voice, supposedly, and what people can do if we work as a coalition within allies and community, in this case, undocumented workers in New York, or undocumented immigrants in general. I started thinking about what does the meaning of belong is, and it tells me, like, I'm from here, here are my roots, my family, my friends, but for most undocumented immigrants, most of that doesn't apply. People are constantly denied belonging. In upstate, rural upstate New York, for example, agriculture is a source of pride for New Yorkers, but it depends and rely on the labor of undocumented immigrants. Very few people know that, or want to accept it, or know, or want to know. For example, it always surprised me, or I always notice that in a lot of the rural roads in upstate New York, we see these big signs, and there might be a dairy farm out there in the distance. And then you might see a big billboard that has the picture of a happy, usually white American traditional family, the mom, the dad, the kids, and then the cows, or maybe or both if it's an apple farm. But and they might say farmers feed the world, and there's so much pride in this community, in these rural areas, for farming and agriculture. But obviously somebody a lot of people are missing in that picture. We want to believe that our families running the dairies or agriculture in general, but in reality, they are immigrants from Guatemala, from Mexico, who keep the dairies. And I know a lot about dairies because I work very closely with them. Some of them work 12-hour shifts, for example, and live right there in the vicinity of the farm by at housing provided by the employers, the farmers. It is belonging then in a community that in so many ways denies your existence is for a lot of people a daily reality. For example, I should go to the next slide. And this is a video, but I think I'm gonna try to show it at the end because I'm not very familiar with how to share. So can we go to the next one? Well, I was gonna just say that, for example, another way that we know that communities are in denial in upstate and rural New York is we see a lot of signs, in support of the Trump administration, and it's really very interesting to me. For example, I infiltrated a rally, a Trump rally in 2017, I think, or 16, with a group of activists and to protest. But something that I had to witness was then candidate Trump saying, we want to build a border, and who's going to build a border? And everybody said, Mexico. And such it is so incredible that people are just so removed from reality. Mexicans and Guatemalans, you depend on their labor in upstate New York. And they live here like hidden neighbors, and usually the farmers or they will see them at the grocery store. They know they're there, but they don't want to say it openly. Many politicians in upstate New York participate in this kind of delusion. They support and propose legislation to close and protect the borders. At the same time, they do their best to oppose any immigration reform. In this context, state legislation and state immigrant rights protections are the only hope for relief that make a difference and help immigrants to belong. And I will talk to you about the one campaign that I participated from beginning to end, and it's about the right to apply for driver licenses in New York. And the history of the driver licenses in New York, around 2002, the then governor Taki, he made it an executive order saying that only people who had social security numbers could apply for a driver license. And so, up until then, immigrants who, even if they were undocumented, they could apply for a license. So a lot of them had a license, but then expire and they couldn't have another one. But a lot of other, the new immigrants couldn't apply for a driver license anymore. So it created a difficult situation for a lot of people to exercise their right to go wherever they want to go, to be able to, especially in rural New York, where we don't have a lot of public transportation, to be able to go to the grocery store, take your kids to the doctor, go to the school for the children, pick them up, go to the teacher conferences, all of that. Then in 2007, then Governor Spitzer had the good intention of changing this again and propose a legislation, but he was not ready for the strong opposition and how and how it was just so strong, and a lot of county clerks that in a lot of the counties, and one of them is Erie County, and back then it was the now governor, she was the county clerk. They opposed it as much as they could. They really said no, and Spitzer just let it go, and then it was not touched for many years. But one thing that community organizations and activists and organizers learn is that we can never just rely on politicians, because they always are going to, most of the time, respond to their self-interest and their self-preservation. So in this case, there was a lot to learn, and from 2007 around 2017, there were a lot of conversations between community organizations, some nonprofits that give services to immigrants, and grassroots organizations and activists on how we're going to change this. Especially in New York City, this might not be an issue because there's a lot of public transportation, but in upstate New York and Hudson Valley, there's everybody pretty much, you need a reliable car, or somebody in your family that has one, or a friend. But if you are in a family that are undocumented, that wasn't possible. So in 2017, several organizations created a coalition, the Green Light New York Driving Together, and it became a campaign. In 2017, it went public, and we organized a press conference in Albany, and there were community organizers, and there were activists and advocates, but most important than anything was the presence of directly affected people. And they gave their testimony, and they said why this was important for them. We all know that speaking up in public, it's hard for anyone, but now imagine you are showing your face and in effect saying, I'm here, undocumented. But then I have a voice, and I'm a human being just like everyone else, and I'm gonna exercise my rights as a human being, And so it was amazing to see that, and that was the official beginning, although we have been doing a lot of work behind doors, but the official public beginning of this campaign. It took us a lot of work, a lot of education in the community to teach them about how the game is played in this country, very much, where if you don't have power, the power could be money, or the power, many other things, mostly money. Access, it gives you access and all of that. But there's the power when people coming together and learning and educating themselves, like I said, to play, how it is done. And so we learn about how laws are passed, how the government is composed, and who do we need to talk to. For me, for example, this was an opportunity to learn that I can just pick up the phone and call a representative and ask for a meeting. And we all learned that together, and it was amazing to have those meetings and go and sit down with representatives and letting them know and educate them about this community that they hardly ever hear from. I mean, in fact, they don't care because they don't get votes. Their votes don't depend on them. This community cannot vote. But one strategy that we use is the education also of we call allies, the community, the citizens, the people with documentation who have a driver license, to tell them, join this campaign. This is an issue of human rights and also of safety, and also of humanity. And I think a lot of it also generosity. We need to give something back to this community that always gets, the short end of the stick. And we just, that was one of the tactics, involve the allies, the community, the advocates, to help us on this. So it took us 2 years. We engaged in many tactics to get our voices across, rallies, protests. At some point, almost at the end of the campaign, or before, a little bit before we won the campaign, some of us civil disobedience and got arrested. It was it was organized. It wasn't just putting people at risk. But we all learn from the past. What has worked in the past is we need to make noise. We need to organize and show that there's power in numbers, and we are not gonna leave this. We're not just gonna give up. So.
Rebecca, if you'd like to show the videos, I'm sorry I didn't show them.
I just put share.
Yeah, I'm gonna undo the share. I was having a hard time doing that. But if you want to show your videos before we go to the wrap up.
Okay, so that will be share. Share will be this one, right? Okay. Oh, what did I do? Are you seeing it? Okay, I'm gonna make it big. And then here we are. Here is in oven. Okay, so that was one. Now I need to come back over here. Not sure how to do this. Well, stop sharing. Okay. And so as you can see, there were like thousands of people, hundreds, thousands of people. I mean, one of the chants that some people actually in Hudson Valley, some community organizers and activists shows what no somos uno, no somos 100, somos millones, cuéntanos bien. We are not one, we are not 100, we are millions. Count us, give us a good count, count it right. And so that to say that, like I said, everybody tries to ignore you, but we are here and we are so many, whether you like it or not. So this took a lot of time. It took a lot, also, like I said, learning, lobbying, what is that? And also the support of organizations that had, some funding. But a lot of the work was being done by the directly affected. They created what we call a gabinete, which was like an advisory board, and they had to be directly affected. And we had to have polls every 2 weeks. And we have to listen to each other as organizers and then directly affected. They know what is needed. And it was just amazing to see and to hear how creative also they got in this campaign. We have the teachers. We even some people created amazing banners. And in our organization, we created a little car with cardboard, and we decorated and we wore it like if it was a car, like if you're driving a car. So there was a lot of joy, and I think this campaign to me exemplifies how we can belong. We create our own ways in this campaign, I really, really like it because sometimes campaign come from the top to the bottom, and we try to not do that here. And also be strategic that a campaign like this not only is to win the driver license or whatever that you're fighting for, but also to learn and to be ready for the next fight. We had a lot to learn from the past, from the civil rights movement, from the history. For example, I could say in Mexico, and we used to share this. How do we protest? How do we say, this is wrong or we want change? And I mean, one of the ways in Mexico, when the government doesn't listen to you, you will go in front of them and sit down and don't move, or make sure that they know that you are there. You don't have any other power but your bodies sometimes. And a lot of people also, of course, in many other countries, is very dangerous and there's a lot of violence directed to people like that. And so we had to also educate ourselves, what are the risks that you're willing to take? And also in that part is in many occasions, people wanted to participate, but we had to decide, and the people who participated in the most risky actions were the allies, right? The people that wanted to help. Finally, after a lot of work, but in 2019, we were able to secure enough votes through all this work so that the legislation will pass and the Senate and the Assembly, and finally the governor to sign it. He signed it immediately. When, I mean, a lot of us were in Albany when I think it was the Assembly that passed it. The Senate had already passed it. I mean, the margin was like this. It was not, we were at the edge of our seats there. And I can say from experience, we convinced one local assembly member to vote yes, but it took us it took a lot of work. Very, very important that we got votes from upstate New York and in these areas. We couldn't just rely on New York City or other places. We had to participate a lot to win this. But on the day of the vote, this assembly member, and I was looking at him because I thought that I was so proud that we were able to convince him and bring him to our side. And I was just waiting for him to vote. And he wasn't voting, and everybody else was voting. We were seeing the numbers, and I was getting very nervous. He waited till the end, and he voted no. And I was just so disappointed, but that was the moment to learn how politicians really, they're always gonna vote, some of them, most of them, like I said, to preserve themselves. I mean, he had to think about the people back home and how was this gonna look. Later on, I tried to talk to some of his representatives or people that work with him and asked them how could he do this, and they said, well, the legislation passed. And it was just such a surprising answer. So you are going to tell me that in the end, if they weren't votes enough, you were going to vote yes? Now I believe that you were still going to vote no, and it would have been it's just opening your eyes and learning in real life how this works. So you're seeing some pictures of the community out there in the the power, where the power concentrates in this state in Albany, and how we learn to make our voices heard. Finally in 2019, the legislation passed. It was not the end. There's still a lot of opposition, a lot of politicians still working to make sure that this is not fully implemented. But there has been a lot of challenges. But right now I can say very proudly that I know and there are so many people that have benefit from this. I know some immigrants in Lovell, New York, out there in the middle of nowhere, working at dairies, that they are so proud to have their driver license. I see the driver license, and a lot of us saw that maybe for some of them is the first documentation that affirms that you are somebody in this country. It has your name, your date of birth, and that it creates a huge difference. And also how the other things that you can do. With this, I also learned, a lot of people say, oh, the governor did it, this legislator, but behind that that law passing, there was so much work and so many undocumented immigrants who learned to utilize their voice and the power. Um, and then later on be able to say this to other people and teach them, this is how we create change. And like I said, I'm very, very proud of the community of this victory. We don't have a lot of victories in these communities, and the little ones that we have, we became the 13th state in the whole country to finally have the driver license for regardless of your immigration status. And so we have to celebrate the victories. That's what sustains a lot of the struggle. And this is a campaign, an example of how can we organize at the local level and win at the state level to improve undocumented immigrants' lives. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rebecca. I think that's an important story to walk away with, and I definitely reinforce your vision of it, that when people show that driver's license, that is their path to belonging. That is their path to being recognized as a contributor here. So, Steve, do you want to go over some of your suggestions for what people can do?
Just real quickly, in case we have any questions, but yeah, I mean, don't be discouraged by what's going on nationally or locally. There's a lot people can do. As Rebecca pointed out, individuals can make a big difference. So you can write your member of Congress either about specific bills that you like or dislike, or advocate generally for immigration reform. There are lots of immigrants' rights organizations, and the next slide will show them. And there are national immigration organizations that put out regular newsletters to keep you informed. Mary Jo, why don't you go to the next slide? And there we have some local resources. And those are all local organizations that can help you stay up to date on what's going on in immigration. So we encourage all of you to follow one or more of these organizations. With that, maybe I'll turn it back over to Ken and see if we have any questions.
Yes, thank you. Thank you so much for this wonderful and rich discussion, and which covered so many points. I'm trying to think of where to begin. I guess I can begin by asking if there are any questions or comments from the online audience as well as the in-person audience. Okay. One of the things I wanted to ask was this. How does today's xenophobia, this fear of immigrants, compare or contrast to, say, a period like the 1880s to the 1920s, when you had massive immigration into the United States from Europe mostly? What is the continuity of discontinuity or discontinuity?
Maybe I'll just start by saying that it has always waxed and waned, certainly. But I think that this online presence, this constant push, and all of this content that floods into people's inboxes really does shift things in a profound way. So I think that's important to know. And maybe just to briefly say, in terms of things that you can do, one of the things that the studies have shown is that there is what's called a movable middle on the issue of immigration. And the idea that, maybe 18% of the people who are, kind of sort of on the fence or maybe even a little negative toward immigration can be moved. And one of the things that can help with that is the idea of inoculation. And that's the concept that if negative images and statements are countered and if positive statements are put forth. So another thing that you can do is simply tell a story. If there's a positive story you can share about immigration, try to tell that and try to boost stories that you see that place immigrants and immigration in a positive light.
That's a great point. Thank you, Beth. Other responses? Comments?
It looked like Ricardo had his hand up. I'm not sure. Or do you want to respond, Rebecca? Go ahead.
So I think there's obviously a lot of similarities. There was people that, because of where they were coming and they were not, they were not welcome. But I think a lot of difference has to do with eventually they have been, their families just blended in, it has to do with how you look. The color of your skin makes a big difference. And I have known people whose families been here for generations, but they're brown and they're still, sometimes they get discrimination, and a lot of them, they get very upset and they say, but I have papers, or my father, was from here and that. Well, gotta understand why that has happened. And hopefully through education, they join the movement because it's, it's a benefit for everyone to create, to have justice.
And just to add on to that, Rebecca, I think what we're seeing now with the detentions along the northern border is a phenomena that we refer to as driving while Mexican. Many people who live in the North Country have pickup trucks. Why is it that the Mexicans and the Guatemalans are the ones that become sort of the victims of being stopped and accused of transporting migrants across international borders? So I think, I don't know about the historic ebbs and flows, but I do believe what was said earlier is to make the stories known, to remind people of what their history is really important. And I see Ricardo has a question, so I'll stop there.
Hi, good evening. Thank you so much for that informative and wonderful presentation. So I come to this population through my work as an outreach worker. Usually when people are homeless and they're without paper, it's impossible for me to house them. And I'm wondering, in Ithaca, in Tompkins County, such a progressive place, the Ithaca thing, how could this population, who are the biggest ethnic groups in Ithaca, remain so occluded and dispersed through our farms, and people don't know about it. People go to Wegman and shop every day and don't know where their foods come from because they don't see this population. They don't even know it exists. Could you talk to that?
I mean, I'll take a stab at that. I think one of the big problems is exactly what Steve laid out. Their options for regularizing their immigration status are none or very limited. And so really a lot of the farm workers who are here undocumented are just trying to stay under the radar. And the one federal proposal, which has been under discussion the past couple of years, the Farm Workforce Modernization Act, proposes to conduct an immigration reform for farm workers. But the devil is in the details. And the way this proposal is formulated, our current workforce would have to declare themselves deportable or leave farm work altogether. And if you're interested, I'll send you a very short thing, which is the interviews with current farm workers. What would you do if this passes as is? And their answer is, I'd leave farm work. Because they are aware of what has happened to the Dreamers. They are aware that DACA, people who have DACA, who gave their information to the government, may risk it all. Because that program, as Steve outlined, is under attack, and it comes under attack at different times. So the farm worker population and families who have children who did apply for DACA don't trust the government with an immigration reform that requires them to share their undocumented status with the government. So in a sense, the strategy is remain under the radar, and that is the best strategy for them today, because there is no immigration reform that's accessible to most of that population. And that's the sad truth. But what I think is important is to make it visible where our food comes from. And I saw a little light of hope during COVID when people started recognizing that they didn't have food or they didn't have access to food. But I hope that we can expand that recognition of where does our milk come from? Who is milking the cows? Who is picking the apples? Who is planting the fields? And really take that in a more serious way.
He said, I put my email in the chat.
Okay.
Okay. Thank you, Richard. And Mary Jo, can you turn your screen share off?
Yes, I'd be happy to.
Okay, great. Thank you. One of the things I found very positive in the presentation was the details about the resourcefulness of immigrants, how they are creating community in the world. That's something that simply is not captured in much of the coverage of this issue in many ways. So I think that's a really important. I think it's important to uplift the self-determination of immigrants. In particular, in terms of trying to reverse the trajectory of these negative and inaccurate narratives. Are there any questions from the audience, from anyone sitting here with us? Yes.
Come on, here, I can read.
How you doing, everybody? My name is Anesti. I am an outreach worker here in Ithaca. My question would be, I've noticed these great talks and stuff. I just want to know, is there a plan, an idea in place to help immigrants gain access to vital resources such as housing, healthcare, that sort of thing? Because I've noticed in Ithaca, out of all my outreach that I've been doing, there is no resources for people, especially the undocumented immigrants in this town. So I would love to see if you guys have any ideas of how to proceed with such a plan.
There are a couple of important resources, and I know I was told to stop sharing my screen, but I think that there's support for undocumented people. Catholic Charities has a support program with clothing and other types of support. Regardless of your immigration status, you should have access to health care because that's a federal protection. And let's keep it going while we can, because Florida has taken that away with state laws. but there's the Tompkins County Immigrants' Rights Coalition. There are different kinds of supports offered by different organizations. And should I pull that screen up again?
Sure.
Just, I don't know if people got a chance to see it.
Yeah, you can put it up.
I think that these are organizations that are very much involved in supporting immigrants' rights. As I showed on the slide, when we do things like the mobile consulate visits, we have labor advocates, we have the health clinic on site, we have pro bono immigration attorneys that can speak, that attendees can speak with. There is certainly in Tompkins County, Journey's End Refugee Services has an office here, and they take a lot of the legal cases. Although, to be honest, right now, the number of attorney resources versus the number of people who need them is extremely limited. And this has been in some ways affected by the busing of migrants from New York City to upstate communities. So when you add huge numbers of asylum seekers, there's competition to have access to those pro bono attorney hours. But there are services here to support them. I don't know if that answers your question.
And maybe if I could add
just,
to that just a little bit. Oh, sorry, Rebecca, go ahead.
no, go ahead. So,
Well, I was just going to add that the TCIRC, this is not a solution. We should not have to have a bake sale when people have emergencies. There should be a solid infrastructure, but there isn't. So if there is a particular emergency, what my students and I do for the people that we're supporting whose legal cases we're handling is we will send out an appeal to the Tompkins County Immigrants' Rights Coalition listserv. And so people can post that for you, or if you join the listserv, you can post it yourself. And this is a very generous community. We've been able to solve a lot of kind of individual problems that way. Sorry, go ahead, Rebecca.
And just to say,
yeah,
I'm a member of the Tompkins County Immigrants' Rights Coalition if you're interested in more information as well. Sorry, Rebecca, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just gonna say I really feel for you because I as part of my work, I was doing a lot of outreach and then finding out all these situations that it was so hard because a lot of the documented population don't have access to services. But my advice is don't take no for an answer. There's always something. I learned a lot about, for example, access to healthcare. When we think that people don't have opportunity for healthcare, there are so many, and you just have to question, teach yourself too. I learned this because I put it on Google and I put, if a person doesn't have this document, but this other document, and and then I get an answer. And then from there, you just, but also, utilize the resources. And one thing that I think that it might not sound very realistic, but I think it's always out there is we have to learn and be open to work outside of the nonprofit, outside of the government funding, because that's what stops us in a lot of these places. And one thing that we started in Syracuse is a house where we give temporary housing to undocumented farm workers. We learned that was a need, and we didn't ask for permission. We just did it with the help of a lot of people. And, we keep it hush hush, but is there? And I think like that, there's so many other places and people who are willing to go against the system to do the right thing. And that has always been the case, So, that's something that gives me hope, that people are willing to do that. People are willing to go out there and accompany immigrants to their appointment at court, immigration court, for example. You know, take them, drive them 2 hours, and be a witness in solidarity. So that's something that always gives hope.
Okay. Well, are there any last comments that any of you would like to make before we transition to our raffle winner? Well, we thank you for just superb presentations and discussion, as well as really crafting an opportunity for migrants to speak for themselves and to speak to their reality. I'm going to and thank all of you who came out tonight to be with us, as well as those in our online audience. We're going to close out now as Lynn comes to give or provide a gift card to someone lucky in our audience.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for attending online and in person. We're going to have 2 separate raffles. Each will be a $50 Wegmans gift card. So right now we're going to be starting with the online. This is just a spinning wheel of all the people who filled out the survey. Here we go. Okay, congratulations to Nasim. We will send an email of how you can come and pick up and collect this Wegmans gift card. Now moving on to in person. Sally Wessels, would you mind raising your hand? Thank you so much. Congratulations. Of course. I'm handing it back off to Kenneth to wrap up the event.
Okay, well, congratulations to our winners. And thanks again for this evening, this first in a series of programs on immigration that will be sponsored by our office and by Richard's office. Just thank you all just for the time that you spent and carved out to be with us tonight. And so wish everyone a good evening, and we will give you a notice, make sure that you have ample information and time to receive it for our upcoming events in 2024. Okay, thank you so much. Enjoy your evenings.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Bye.
Thank you.